Hello everyone, my name is Amanda and I am a 30-year-old housewife. As I stand here today, I can't help but reflect on the intricate web of my life, woven with threads of obligation, expectation, and the silent sacrifices of those we love. My story is not just mine, but also that of my father, a kind and gentle soul who became unwittingly ensnared in the demands of my married life 5 years ago. Life was simpler, or so it seemed. I lived in a small, cozy house on the outskirts of the city with my husband Charles and his mother Sandra. You might think this sounds like a warm family setting, but there was a catch. My presence in the house was under a constant unspoken condition. My father would pay for everything each month. He quietly handled our bills, never once letting his discomfort show, though I could see the strain it caused him living with Charles. And Sandra was like walking a tight trope. Sandra, with her commanding presence and sharp tongue, made no secret of her expectations. It's for the best, Amanda. Your father can afford it, and it keeps the family comfortable, she would say, her voice laced with an edge that suggested it was anything but a request. Charles, on his part, stood silently by, his complacency a loud echo in our tension-filled home. Despite the discomfort, my love for Charles and respect for marital commitments kept me tethered to that house. Each day I hoped for a change, a sign that things could be different, that we could be a real family bound by love rather than financial transactions. But deep down I knew I was clinging to a fantasy, one that was slowly suffocating under the weight of unspoken agreements and forced smiles. As I sit here now, looking back, I realize how those years shaped the person I have become, teaching me about resilience and the bittersweet realities of love and family. Little did I know the toughest tests were yet to come, starting with a phone call that would change everything. The day my father died was a day that broke me in ways I had never imagined. I remember every detail with painful clarity: the urgent phone call, the rush to the hospital, and the cold, echoing halls that seemed to mourn with me. He had suffered a heart attack, sudden and severe, and despite every effort, he was gone before I could even say goodbye. In the days that followed, wrapped in a shroud of grief, I found myself grappling with an overwhelming sense of loss, not just of my father, but of the very foundation of my life. He had been my rock, the quiet strength in every storm. Without him, I felt adrift, vulnerable to the turbulent emotions that swept over me. It was during this vulnerable time that my father's lawyer called me into his office to discuss the will, a concept that felt strangely alien amid my grief. Sitting across from him in that stark, orderly office, I listened in stunned silence as he outlined what my father had left behind to me, his only child. He had bequeathed $50 million and a luxurious house in one of the city's most coveted neighborhoods. The figures were astronomical, unreal, and as I processed the news, a part of me wished it were all a mistake. When I returned home with the heavy weight of inheritance on my shoulders, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Sandra's eyes, usually cold and calculating, now burned with a greedy intensity as she cornered me in the living room. Amanda, she began, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy that swiftly turned commanding, you need to transfer the $50 million to my account and the house to Charles. It's what's best for the family. Her demand hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I was still reeling from my loss, and here was my mother-in-law not offering comfort or support, but seizing the opportunity to enrich herself and her son at my expense. The audacity of her claim was suffocating, and in that moment I knew that their kindness had always been a facade, conditional on what my father could provide. I can't do that, Sandra, I found myself saying, my voice firmer than I felt. That money and the house are my father's final gift to me, not to be squandered or commandeered by anyone. The look of shock and then rage on her face was terrifying. She stepped closer, her voice of venomous whisper, "You will regret this decision." Amanda, I promise you that as I stood my ground, the house felt smaller, the walls closing in with the threat of impending storms. I had stood up to Sandra for the first time, but at what cost? The foundations of my life were about to be shaken, and I braced myself for the fallout that was sure to come. The fallout from my refusal to surrender my inheritance was swift and brutal. Within days, the home I had shared with Charles and Sandra felt more like a battleground, charged with hostility and silent accusations. Charles, whom I had loved and trusted, now looked at me with a mix of confusion and resentment. The man who had vowed to stand by me in sickness and in health seemed lost, torn between his mother's manipulative demands and the remnants of our shared life. The tension reached its peak one cold morning when Charles handed me the divorce papers. His hands were steady, but his eyes avoided mine. "Amanda, this is how it has to be," he muttered almost to himself. The words felt like a sharp jab to my already bruised heart. I realized then that I was not just losing a husband, I was being discarded because I no longer fit into the convenient mold they had designed for me. I signed the papers with a trembling hand, the ink of my signature marking the end of one life and the uncertain beginning of another. As I packed my belongings, Sandra watched from the doorway, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "You brought this upon yourself," she said, a cruel note of victory in her voice. Evicted from the house, and with the divorce finalizing my isolation, I moved into the home my father had left me. It was a beautiful, sprawling estate, a stark contrast to the modest house I had been forced out of alone. Amidst the echoing halls of my new home, I struggled to piece together a semblance of normalcy. But fate, it seemed, had yet another curve to throw my way. Charles, now grappling with the harsh realities of his decisions, suffered a severe accident at his workplace, a mishap that left him with a broken leg and unable to continue his duties as a security guard. The irony of his plight, once a figure of strength and now broken and jobless, was not lost on me. It wasn't long before he came knocking on my door, his pride swallowed by his dire circumstances. "Amanda, I need help," he said, standing awkwardly on crutches on my doorstep, a shadow of his former self. "I've made mistakes, but I'm in a bad place. I can't work, and there's nowhere else to turn." Looking into his eyes, I saw the desperation and the faint hope that I might mend the bridges he had burned, but the wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep. I had learned a harsh lesson in self-preservation, and though every fiber of my being ached with the desire to help, I knew better. "I'm sorry, Charles," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I can't. You made your choice, and now I have to make mine." As I closed the door on Charles and symbolically on my old life, I felt the final tie severing. It was time to rebuild not just my home, but my entire existence. The journey ahead was mine alone, and I was determined to rise from these ashes stronger and more resilient than ever. As the dust settled on the upheavals of my past, the vast, silent rooms of the house my father left me seemed to echo with possibility. It was here, amidst the sprawling gardens and sunlit corridors, that I began to envision a new purpose, a sanctuary not just for myself, but for others who had reached their twilight years without a place to call home. Inspired by my father's lifelong dream of giving back to the community, I decided to transform the estate into a haven for the elderly. The idea was not just to offer them shelter, but to create a vibrant community where stories, wisdom, and laughter could intermingle freely. I poured my heart and resources into renovating each room, ensuring comfort and warmth radiated from every corner. The work was exhaustive but exhilarating. With each new fixture installed, each piece of furniture carefully chosen, I Felt a piece of my old wounds heal the physical labor of building something. Tangible was therapeutic, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil I had endured. It was during these days of hard work that I truly came to terms with the end of my marriage and the betrayal that accompanied it as the home neared completion. I began to meet with potential residents. Each elder came with a lifetime of experiences etched into their faces and a cautious hope in their eyes. I listened intently to their stories, each one a testament to resilience and strength. Stir slowly, the house began to fill with its new inhabitants, their presence breathing life into its once empty spaces. One particular resident, Mrs. Eleanor Rigby, sprightly 80-year-old with sparkling eyes and a penchant for storytelling, became the unofficial matriarch of our little community. Her tales from her youth, infused with humor and wisdom, became a nightly fixture in the common room, bringing smiles and often tears to all who listen. It's about making the most of every day, dear, she told me one evening as we sat watching the sunset from the porch. Her words struck a chord, reminding me of the fleeting nature of time and the importance of making every moment count. Amidst the daily routines, I found unexpected joy in the simple acts of companionship, sharing meals, celebrating birthdays, and offering a listening ear. The home was no longer just a structure of brick and mortar. It was a living, breathing community, a tapestry of lives woven together by shared humanity. And in this bustling hive of activity and new beginnings, I rediscovered myself, freed from the chains of my past. I began to embrace the future with open arms, ready for whatever adventures it might bring. My father's dream had come to fruition, not just in the physical creation of the home, but in the community it nurtured. In fulfilling this dream, I had found a new purpose and a red sense of peace. The healing power of helping others had given me a fresh start, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at home. The seasons changed as the home for the elderly blossomed under my care, and with each passing day my heart grew fuller with the joy and love that surrounded me. It was during one of my regular visits to the local bank to manage the finances of the home that fate decided to reintroduce an old chapter for my life. Jacob, I uttered in surprise, recognizing the familiar face behind the bank manager's desk. It was Jacob, my childhood friend, whose kind eyes and gentle smile had once been a source of comfort and laughter during our school days. Now here he was, looking every bit the professional, but still with that same warmth in his eyes. Amanda, it's been ages, he exclaimed, his voice tinged with genuine happiness. We talked about everything and nothing, filling the space between us with years of missed connection and memories. It was as if no time had passed at all, yet here we were, worlds apart from the children who had raced bicycles down neighborhood streets. As our meetings became a regular occurrence, the connection we rekindled grew deeper. Jacob was a grounding presence, his steady demeanor a stark contrast to the tumultuous relationships of my past. His interest in my work and his eagerness to visit the home and meet its residents touched me deeply. He didn't just listen, he engaged, bringing laughter and joy to everyone he met. One crisp autumn evening, as we walked through the gardens of the home, Jacob stopped and turned to face me, his expression serious yet tender. Amanda, he began, his hands nervously fidgeting with a small box he had pulled from his pocket. I've seen you bring so much happiness to others, and you've brought so much to me too. I can't imagine a future without you. Will you marry me? The proposal took my breath away, not just because it was unexpected, but because it felt so right. Here was a man who saw me for who I truly was, who had been a friend long before he became a lover. Yes, Jacob, I replied, my voice steady and my heart full. Yes, I will marry you. Our wedding was a simple yet beautiful A fair held in the very gardens where he proposed, surrounded by the people who had become my family with the golden hues of the setting sun as our backdrop. We exchanged vows of love and commitment life with Jacob brought a sense of completeness I had never known. Together we navigated the challenges and joys of our days, always supportive, always kind. My home, once a symbol of mine, new beginning now also became a symbol of our shared future. As I reflect on the journey that brought me here from the depths of despair to the heights of happiness, I am reminded of the unpredictable twists of fate. Each step, each decision led me to this moment. I am profoundly grateful for the pain, for without it I might never have appreciated the true beauty of my life. Now and so, with Jacob by my side and a community that thrives on love and respect, I look forward to the days ahead. With every sunrise, I am reminded of the power of new beginnings and the endless possibilities that come when you open your heart to change.